Hey everyone, I hope you guys are staying warm and that you're enjoying our reading. Today, I'm just checking in to talk to you a little bit about how to use some of these terms that we're learning in our text um, in a dialogue talking about art. I really do think about this class as a class where, as we're learning to appreciate art, we're also learning to discuss it effectively. And so, learning how to put that terminology into action and recognize specific things about an individual work of art, that's honestly my biggest goal for this class. So, today I'm just going to show you a couple paintings from my home collection and talk to you about a couple different aspects of them. First of all, before we even get started, a word that I want you guys to really bring into your dialogue, your personal dialogue, is composition. So when we're talking about the word composition, we're talking about the way that a work of art is put together. So if you think about the root of that word, compose, if you think about a musician, or rather a composer, the composer is writing music, putting together notes to create something larger for us to hear. Um, so as an artist, we're composing works of art, or rather, they are composing works of art. I'm also an artist, so I think of it as we. Um, so when we talk about this painting of my dog, Annie, I'm talking about this as the total composition. This is by a local artist. Her name is Catherine Rausch. If you're ever looking for pet portraits, she is the absolute best. She's really, really good at pet portraits. Um, so this is a piece of our Beagle Mix Annie. And when we're talking about the composition, the full body of the work, the image that you're seeing, that's the composition. It's what's been put together by the artist. So you can talk about certain aspects of the composition. We haven't quite gotten in your reading to symmetry and balance yet, but we could talk about space. We can talk about texture, color, line. We also talk about whether it's an abstract composition, a representational composition, or a realistic composition. So one of the first things I'm going to talk to you about with this piece in particular is space. So something I want you guys to really learn how to identify. Let me just pick this up. Not normally supposed to touch works of art, but this is mine, so I'm gonna go for it. All right, so you can see some of the brushwork a little bit closer this way, and I'll pick that up again in a second, just so you can see that a little bit closer. But when we talk about positive and negative space, we're talking about the way that the artist has decided to use their composition. So negative space is going to be unoccupied space. This light blue all around her form, that's negative space. There's nothing occupying that space. If we tried to go like this in the space, our hands wouldn't touch anything. So negative space is kind of like breathing room. That's what artists use that for. It's space that is a place for our eye to sort of like take a break. Positive space in this painting is going to be the dog. She takes up physical space. If we were to touch that part of the composition in person, it would have, substance. And also, there's a lot of activity happening there within the composition. So there is a question in your reading quiz, which opens today, that asks you to identify the negative space in a composition that's provided for you to look at. So just remember, it's going to be that unoccupied space. Negative space is often the background, and not every work of art has negative space. So it just depends on the way each artist has individually put together their composition. Another thing that I want you to think about right off the bat, and I keep saying art general, but we're really talking about two-dimensional works of art at this point in the semester. So 2D works of art are going to be works of art that are pretty flat. So This is on a canvas, relatively flat surface, and we're not talking about a sculptural form. If we were talking about this ceramic cup, we could talk about a sculptural form. But for the purpose of this point in the semester, we're talking 2D. So the next thing that I want you guys to think about when you're looking at a 2D work of art, and right now we're looking at paintings, is it abstract? Is it representational? Is it somewhere in the middle? And I do want you to understand that there is a middle, and many works of art are in the middle. So this work is definitely representational. We can tell that it's a dog. However, even though elements of it are realistic, the eyes are realistic, I would say that it has some abstract qualities to it. And that's just the way that it's been styled by the artist. So if you get up really close, you can see that the artist has used some very expressive mark making techniques. There's orange in the composition. So it's not abstracted in a way that it doesn't look like her, because this truly does look exactly like her. But we have some stylistic things that are happening with the way that the paint's been applied. I would be okay saying that this piece is realistic, but it's not photorealistic. And so there's a difference between that too, between realism and photorealism. Photorealism is going to be any work of art that is so meticulously made that it might as well be a photo. So it's going to be pretty rare that you see photorealistic paintings. They're out there probably every time you go to a museum, you have the opportunity to see one. However, it's going to be probably more common that works are in that more stylized realm of things, where even if an artist is working representationally or realistically, they're bringing specific like painterly qualities to it. So again, you can see the colors that have been incorporated here, as well as the brushwork. And with that brushwork, there are different things that we can talk about. We can talk about visual texture. So there's a couple different kinds of texture that can be seen in 2D works of art. And I kind of like to split those into two realms. It's going to be visual texture, which is texture that is created by the artist. It's an optical illusion. And then also physical texture. So physical texture is going to be texture that if you touched it, it would have, some physicality to it. Painting here that I'm going to show you in a minute. I don't know if you can tell. You probably can't. But the paint has been built up on it. And if I were to run my fingers across this painting, it has texture that's been made by the built up brush strokes. This painting, it has a little bit of physical texture, but it mostly keeps to the flat plane of the canvas. But I would say definitely visual texture has been created in these marks that she's made with her brush. Another thing that I want you guys to think about is color palette. So, we've established this palette is close enough to life, which is what we call a local color palette. Local color is going to be color that is as seen. However, she has brought in, she sort of electrified it. There's these bright blues, the orange is super bright. So we're not seeing like really a lot of browns, a lot of blacks. So things have kind of been traded out. So that's something to think about. You don't necessarily have to have a way to name each of these things. When you are analyzing a work of art, you can talk around it in order to form your observations the same way that I'm doing now. And that's why I'm doing this, is to give you a little bit of practice about what that might sound like. For your first writing assignment, you will be writing about art and trying to put these words into dialogue. Another thing that I want you guys to think about is subject matter versus content. These two things sound very similar, but subject matter is going to be the actual image that's being presented. So the subject of this painting is Annie the dog. And if you saw this painting on a gallery, you might not know her name was Annie. So I know that because she's my dog. So you could just say the subject is a dog, or a dog with spots, etc. The subject is a dog. The content is going to be more the message the artist is trying to convey. And content's going to be subjective. So the artist may have one thing that they viewed as the content of their piece, but you as the viewer have the right to interpret it in your own way. But let's say you're looking at this piece and you say the subject is a dog and the content is, loyalty. Dogs are very loyal. The content is adoration. She's really staring into your soul. The content is man's best friend, a friend for life, a soulmate, a relationship lasting, beyond the lifespan of animals. Lots of different ways to interpret the content of that piece. So again, things to remember: content and subject matter, slightly different, sometimes similar, but slightly different. And that a piece can be representational without being realistic or photorealistic. So those are kind of things on the spectrum of representation. We have photorealism, realism, representation, abstraction, and then we have like the very abstract. Something can be representational and abstract at the same time. Cartoons are representational and abstract at the same time. We're able to name that, like, that's a bunny, that's a person, but Bart Simpson probably doesn't look like anybody that you know. So Bart Simpson is representational of a person, but not in a realistic way. Bart Simpson is abstracted, if that makes sense to you. Let me know if you have any questions about this. Let me put a good example here. Got this greeting card on my wall. So this card features an image of a muskox. And while I can name that it's a muskox and it's representational of a muskox, it has definitely been abstracted with all these different swirls and things. I would also say that the negative space is this yellow area here. Even though that space does sort of represent the hill and it would have, physicality to it, I would still call that the negative space just because this is the breathing room for our eyes. So it's going to take some of your own assessing for those kinds of things. But this image is a good example of something that's representational, but also abstracted, not realistic. Okay. I'm going to show you another painting real quick. Sorry, the lighting keeps going in and out in here. All right. Okay. So this is a painting of a ship. That would be the subject matter of this painting. I actually do not know who the artist of this painting is. We inherited this work from my husband's grandfather, and I love it because it reminds me of the scene in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis, where the sea begins to turn in the painting, and the children use the painting as their doorway to Narnia. So that's why I love this painting. It's a classic oil painting, very smooth on the surface, so not really any physical texture, but definitely some actual texture that has been created here in this choppy sea. It really does feel like it would feel like water if you touched it and be turbulent, you know? I would say that this sky pictured here is the negative space. And I would actually say that this painting is realistic. So we have, the picture's not very good on this. Painting is massive. We have some very realistic value that has been articulated here by the artist. When we're talking about value, we're talking about the use of light and shadow to depict three-dimensionality. So especially with the sails on this ship, the artist has done a great job with shadow, making them feel like they really billow out. They don't feel just like flat, pieces of paper. They feel like the wind is in those sails. It's moving that boat. And the sea, it really looks like the sea. I would not say this piece is photorealistic because, again, I up close and a lot of your interpretation of works, it really does need to happen in person. There's a lot that doesn't come through in video and photos. But up close, I can tell that this is a painting. I'm not questioning what it's made of. There is, some beautiful brushwork happening here that's not being hidden. So I would say that this piece is a great example of realism, but I wouldn't bring it into the realm of photorealism. This is a great one to talk about color palette because it has actually a pretty limited color palette. And that is a term that you can use to describe a piece that doesn't have a lot of things on the spectrum. Mostly blues and grays. When we're talking about the temperature of this palette, which is another way that you can discuss color, we would say that this palette has a very cool temperature. So blues, greens, those are all going to be your cool colors, kind of colors you would think of when you think of ice, snow, winter. Also very just like calming colors. And then colors like red, yellow, orange, those are going to be your warm colors. You don't necessarily have to name a temperature for any particular color palette because you might have a really vivid palette that includes, everything, and you might come up with a different word to describe that palette. This is definitely a cool color palette. Seems like a serene day. You can almost feel salt on your face from that. Again, negative space around here. And talking about subject and content, I would say, again, subject of this piece, a ship in the ocean, a ship at sea. You could also get more specific if you know a lot about ships. And then content, I would interpret it as, adventure on a journey, a voyage. It could also be interpreted as endless possibilities because the sea is so vast. So whatever kind of metaphor or meaning you personally pull from that image is going to be the content of the work. Another element that you do want to think about is line, and it's not always going to be super prominent in a lot of works. This does have some specific line work where, the rigging for the ship has been created. We also have where the front of the ship is creating not only a line, but it's kind of a directional line as well. The ship is moving in that direction. Just looking really quick again at this dog painting, the artist actually uses a lot of line in her creation of the form of the dog. The line's pretty prominent there. And it's been layered to create the surface. I'm just going to show you one more small painting. And again, typically you're not handling art with your hands. but these are my own pieces, so it's okay. When you go to a museum, please don't touch the art. So here is another painting. It's a pretty small painting by my friend Katie Morrill. She is a North Carolina based artist. And I would say this painting is representational. We're just seeing, a winter scene in the wood with snow. It could either be at dawn or at twilight. We've got a little bit of light filtering through the trees, and we can see the snow, but it's pretty dark. Not much light happening there. I'm going to say this piece is abstracted, so it's representational, but it has been abstracted somewhat. It relies a lot on painterly marks that have built it up, and we don't have a lot of specific details involved there. So she's definitely, all painters build their paintings with brush strokes, but we can visibly see how it's made, if that makes sense to you guys. Um, cool color palette, and just another example of sort of that spectrum of representation, um, realism, abstraction, representation is sort of in the middle. I will show you guys some abstract pieces in our next little mini lecture, just so you can get an idea of a wider range of that spectrum, pieces that are not necessarily dealing with recognizable imagery, pieces that might just simply be dealing with shape or color, non-objective works. I hope hearing me use some of those words in dialogue talking about art is helpful for you. Um, there are some really wonderful exhibits around town if you're interested in going out into the world and seeing some art. Um, Keep in mind that the exhibit that is at Spartanburg Art Museum right now is sort of a funky one. It's a fundraiser exhibit where local artists have made copies of famous paintings, or what I like to call covers of famous paintings. So if we think about like a cover version of a song, it might be pulling things from the original, but also have its own twist. So a lot of the pieces are closer to covers. So if you're confused when you walk into Spartanburg Art Museum, that's what's going on. There's also a great show at the Upstate Gallery at Chapman Cultural Center, and trying to think of what else is going on in town. There's a really good show at the Johnson Collection right now as well. Also, if you've ever been into the lobby of the AC Hotel, which is across from Cribs, like the original Cribs in downtown Spartanburg, there's some wonderful work by significant artists in the lobby of the hotel. Just walk in and look at it. This is not an assignment right now, just if you're wanting to go out into the world to see some art, those are some great places in Spartanburg. There's great places in Greenville, great places in Simpsonville, Charlotte area. So just let me know if you need any suggestions if you're wanting to dive into the world of art patronage. Again, I hope that was helpful for you guys. Your first quiz is now open. Be sure that you've read through at least page 103 to complete that reading quiz. It is open book, but going to be way more useful if you've actually read the text. Your questions are all really pulled from glossary terms, and those are the terms that you're going to need to participate effectively in these discussions about art. So again, let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you have a great week.